So this is the first book that the wheel gave me. Reasonable Adults, a novel by Robin Leffler. I just picked this up last night thinking I'd like to get started on my November reads, even though it's a little bit early and it's October. And I also knew that I wanted to do a vlog, a reading vlog for the whole month for Nonfiction November and Bloom and Readathon reads, because I read one book at a time, and that's really easy to chronicle in comparison to what I normally do, where I'm reading here, there, and everywhere throughout the day. So I just read one book at a time in the month of November, and so instead of doing a regular wrap-up, I tend to just do a reading vlog, and that is what I would like to do this month. Last night, I picked this up because even though it's a little bit early, it's still October, I wanted to start this. I was feeling like I wanted to start it, and I thought I'd just read a few pages and get a feel for it. And I am on page 106, chapter 10, and had to go get up in the middle of the night from my bed where I was reading and get some tabs. They're green, so they're hard to see, but I'd say I probably have like 12 tabs or something in here already. This book is so good. Not only is it like super fun to hold and read because it's like the floppiest of the floppy books, and the feel of it is like satiny and lovely and wonderful, but the content of this book is amazingly funny. And also relatable, very relatable. Okay, wait, so I should tell you a little bit about it before I dive into some of my quotes here that I've marked. There is a woman, Kate Rigsby, and she has a job that she doesn't really enjoy, and she has a recently made ex who was going to be her fiance, who she catches cheating. And one night she is very frustrated with both her job and this ex, and she records a video and she puts it on Facebook or Twitter or something like that. And it gets back to her place of work, and she is let go for the things that she says on this video about this person because of the relationship that he has with their company. And so she accepts a position at an artist's retreat, basically. But it's an artist retreat for the incredibly, insanely wealthy. And she is supposed to like be one of the head marketing people, or the head marketing person. And when she arrives, everything is terrible. Nothing is what it seems. So relatable. Like, this is the kind of job that I get all the time and then go, this is not what we thought it was going to be. It looks so good and you feel so much hope, and then the reality is that they lied to you. And there are other things going on, but this is just beautiful writing. So so she's talking to her boss, and he's about to say something super inappropriate. Like, she could have gone to HR about this before she got fired, but he's about to tell her that she needs to wear more makeup, that she looks old, that she's not pretty. I mean, her job is marketing. Like, he's about to tell her all of this, but she says, "We do not know each other at all," because he says, "I think I know you well enough to say this to you." And she's thinking, "We do not know each other at all. This must be what it feels like to watch a car speeding towards you with no idea whether it will stop before flattening you into a 31-year-old pancake." "You're not getting any younger," he says. There it is. I'm a pancake, a violently angry pancake. The image of a violently angry pancake is just too good. Let's see here. The language. When she gets there, she finds out that like the language that they use to describe things. So she gets greeted by one of the guys who works there. His name is Kevin, and he's like really pretentious. And Kevin snorts at my inability to translate pretension. For example, he says, "What's your output?" My output? I fear his eyes might get stuck. They roll so far back. Yes, your output. He stresses the word like saying it slowly and loudly will somehow make the meaning clear. It does not. Your output, your craft, your art. What do you give back to this beautiful earth in gratitude for providing you the chance to live on it? I laugh because I have worked with people who use this kind of language on the regular. Here's another. So this is someone else who has a little more edge to them, but still uses this kind of language. And I just really related to it because people have said things like this to me. She calls back over her shoulder. Observe the fall colors. Inhale the scents layering the forest, lake water, decay, frost. Consider that everything out here is dying, even as it is born, including your best ideas. How are you going to nurture them long enough to make them reach some of their potential? Everything out here is dying, including your best ideas. This mushroom will be consumed by something higher up on the food chain any day now. But do you see it shriveling? Is it giving up the ghost because its fate is inevitable? No, it's pushing through the leaves, displaying this crust of frost like armor. She surveys Adam and me, green eyes narrowing under the rolled edge of her beanie. What does your armor look like? I was just having a blast reading this book last night. Oh, she finds out that her office is in the furnace room, that she's basically in a cave underground. And she says, the person who takes her there is a very sweet girl, but she's obviously like fully joined in this cult. And she tries to see the positive in everything. And her name is Tanya. It says Tanya shifts. She sees her office and she says, "Is this some kind of hazing ritual?" Tanya shifts nervously from foot to foot. I feel bad for making her uncomfortable. This isn't her fault. I try again. I mean, I guess this is the safest spot to be if a tree falls onto the building, so that's great. Yes, absolutely. And in the case of a tornado as well. Do you see a lot of those here? I personally haven't experienced one, no, but global warming is changing things. Maybe we'll get more. You know things aren't going well when you're hoping for more tornadoes. I just love this author. She's a debut author. Her name is Robin Leffler, and I think she's going to be an auto-buy author for me if all things go well throughout the rest of the book. Let's see. She decides, I don't want to tell you what she decides. I don't want to ruin anything, but one of the people tries to explain why people don't just leave this place of work because things are really messed up. Like when you read the book, you'll understand they're really messed up. And so I think it's Tanya actually who says, Kevin and Mike could go anywhere. They could do anything, but they're here. They are here. She hits the arm of the chair with each word. This place is special. These people are special. What we're doing, it seems ridiculous. I get that. But when it comes down to it, we're showing people how to find out who they are, what makes them so uniquely them. And who cares if some are entitled and snooty? Everyone deserves to understand what makes them tick, even if the first step is just a quiet weekend in the woods to listen to whatever their heart is trying to tell them. And I just liked that. That resonated with me. I am thoroughly enjoying my time with Reasonable Adults by Robin Leffler. I am laughing, I'm thinking, and there's a little romance blossoming, and I think he has a secret, and I think I know what that secret is. We'll find out. His name is Matt, but really enjoying it. The dog in it is great. His name is Eric. Eric the Golden Doodle. Just a really great read. Super, super loving it. Afraid I'm going to finish it today and be well into my November reads, and it's still October. But that's okay. That's okay. Read what you want when you want. Feel what you feel when you feel it. For now, that is my first check-in with Reasonable Adults, my first check-in for Nonfiction November and Bloomin' Readathon, and my first check-in for the first book that The Wheel gave me. And I'm starting on such a high because I think this is going to be a favorite book of the year, and I think this is going to be a new favorite auto-buy author for me. So rom-com glory right there. Let's go read. Hi, let's do a check-in about November reading. I almost said February. About November reading. The last time I checked in, I had already started Reasonable Adults by Robin Leffler, and I was loving it. And I finished reading it and loved it to the very end. This is such a great rom-com. I will say that there are 2 points where they have like the confusion or the breakup point in the storyline, because it is a romance and it follows that trajectory. And those feel, both of them, completely out of the blue, completely weird responses for the situation that you find them in, over the top, misunderstanding, obtuseness. And that bothered me for half a second, because then it picks up with communication and those 2 moments felt like they were expected to be there, so they were put in there, and they didn't feel organic to the actual storytelling. That's what bothered me the most about them. They felt contrived, they felt required, and they were not needed or necessary for the actual story that was being told. And then the other thing that bothered me was that it ended. I wanted it to go on and on and on and on forever. I wanted to know about these people. I would read a whole series about these people and their lives in the backwoods of Ontario trying to run a retreat center. I just really, really loved this whole situation. I loved the whole premise of the book. I loved the characters. I loved the romance. It was beautiful. Then the next book that The Wheel picked for me was Meet Me in Another Life, and I had delegated this one for the emotional book from the bingo board, and I didn't know if it was actually going to be emotional. Cue to me sobbing at the end of this one. There is no footage of me sobbing. Just imagine. But yeah, wow, it was emotional. The book is broken up into several parts. In the first part, you're reading almost like a short story made up with the same characters over and over again. Every chapter is like a different short story populated with the same people, but the people have different relationships to each other. So in one, they're both college students. In another, they're a father and daughter. In another, they're adults who fall in love. In another, they're co-workers. But they're the same, or a teacher student, but they're the same people over and over again. And their stories start and end in different ways, but always in the same location, always in the same place. And the same people, periphery people, populate their world in similar roles, always. Their 2 roles change tremendously from story to story. Other people's roles stay kind of the same. And then once you get into part 2, you start to get some very small clues as to what's going on. They start to realize that they can remember all these past lives or experiences, roles that they've had in each other's lives forever. And they start to point out some interesting things in the environment. The stories start to point out some interesting things in the environment. And by part 3, it's become one cohesive story that incorporates all the little bits and pieces for you until you get to the end and you realize they realize what's going on. What is happening? There's a lot of really big questions in here about fate versus free will. There's a lot of really big questions in here about the roles we play in each other's lives, about community, about relationship. There's a lot of really big questions in here about what people are capable of. Can good people do bad things and still be good? Can bad people do good things and still be bad? What's gray? What's not? There's so much in this book. It is beautiful and heartbreaking and impossible to tell you more. I've maybe said too much already about what's going on. I think very few people have completely read this book. I think they get stuck in part one, where it's just retelling and you kind of feel like, I mean, it's interesting. It's such an interesting book. I would like to read, this is her debut novel. I would like to read something else by Catriona Silvey, just to know what is she? Like, as far as a writer goes, what is she? Because it's so beautifully written. It's so well written because there is character growth, even though the characters are the same people, but in totally different roles in each other's lives and in society for every one of the chapters in the first part of the book. And yet there's still cohesion, there's still movement, there's still trajectory and growth. It's so fascinating from just a writing craft standpoint. It's pretty brilliant. And I think that maybe a lot of people picked this up thinking this is just a reincarnation story. It's not. It kind of is, but it's kind of not. It's philosophical and really deep, but also highly readable. But I think maybe some people picked it up and read the first part and were like, ooh, I don't want to keep reading this for another 200 pages. Like, they're just going to keep being these different people over and over and over again. Like, that's weird. I read one comment or one review by somebody who completely missed the point. It was like, ooh, gross. How can they go from falling in love in one life to being father and daughter in another? Like, come on. They're the same people, but they're not the same people. I just think maybe it's a misunderstood book until you get to the very end. And then in the vein of books like, let's say, The Starless Sea or The 7.5 Deaths of Evelyn Hardcastle or The Cartographers, there's more than meets the eye. And you're best not knowing what's happening until you know what's happening. And then don't ruin it for other people. But this is kind of like, it's for everyone, but because of the way that it's written and because we can't talk about it, it's kind of like an esoteric doorway. Like, only those who will stick it out will receive the reward. I really loved this. I actually really, really loved this more than I thought I would when I thought that it was just a romance about reincarnation, which is what I thought it was when I put it on my TBR. And that's not what it's about at all. This is a gorgeous, thought-provoking, sob-inducing book. And I loved it. I loved it. Then I listened to What Souls Are Made Of, a remix of Wuthering Heights, from my Libby app from the library. And in all honesty, I wish that I had a physical copy of this because I was so loving reading these books. And in November, I'm reading one book at a time in isolation, and I can see like everything I'm reading. I'm like, ooh, that's tab worthy, including a rom-com, which it totally is tab worthy. I'm loving being immersed in one book at a time. And I'm tending to read mostly during lunchtime and in the evenings before I go to bed. In fact, it's been cold and days have been very long at work and I just want silence. And so crawling into bed at, no judgment here, my teacher friends will understand, by crawling into bed at like 8:30 and reading until 10 or so in the evening, and just really, she doesn't love it so much. Although she does love snuggling, but she would much rather we stay awake and eat food. Hi, love bug. But I've just been loving that so much, and both of the books before What Souls Are Made Of were perfect for that. And then I was just listening to What Souls Are Made Of, and I feel like I missed something in my experience. The book itself, I'm just going to keep talking while she plants herself firmly between me and whatever I'm doing that's not playing with her. So What Souls Are Made Of is, as it says on the tin, a remix. I love you too, Lowe's. Yes, I do. I love you too. It's a remix of Wuthering Heights, from a more racially conscious perspective. It's the same story, basically, only more context is given for the race of Heathcliff, who is from the Indian subcontinent. I'm trying to do a thing here, babe. Okay, who's from the Indian subcontinent, and the role that he plays in Victorian society. It's actually pre-Victorian society, so Georgian society. And Kathy comes from an unknown heritage. So they play up the idea or the comments in Bronte's version of her own novel, where it says that Kathy is dark. And in all honesty, I don't believe that that intends to indicate that she is dark-skinned, like this book does. This book takes those comments very literally. I really think it's talking about her heart and her capabilities, whereas it's very clear in Bronte's work that Heathcliff is a person of color. And so, and we have, like in all our film versions and everything, we've made him quite white and British, and he's neither of those things in Emily Bronte's book. And so I appreciated that reclaiming of this YA version of Wuthering Heights, but I think that it is telling the same story, and I think you actually lose a whole lot by making Kathy mixed race in the story that could be very powerful if we had just given Heathcliff and his person of color point of view within his world context and clarity. Is that all I want to say? As far as the retelling of the actual story goes, that also loses a lot of power because a lot of the story is cleaned up and taken away. A lot of the pain that they're causing each other is somehow attributed to society, and while that is true somewhat in the story, in reality it's really a story about two really warped people who've been warped by their families, sure, and social expectations, sure, but really it's these two people fated to be together that ruin each other's lives rather than not be together. That's what it's about. It's about how destructive passion can be. And it's not a romance. It was never intended to be a romance, I don't think. And this book thinks it's a romance. This remix thinks it's a romance. So I feel like a lot was missed. A lot of it was definitely changed, which is a remix, it should be, but too much of it was kept exactly the same. So it just feels like it's been diluted. It was not a win for me. It was not a huge loss either. It felt like a paraphrase by a student who doesn't understand what they're paraphrasing. That's what it felt like. Yeah, I was not a fan. I was just not a fan. And I had high hopes for it. When I finished that last night, I picked up the next on the list, and that is Anton Dubecky's One Enchanted Evening. I am 115 pages into this. I have one tab. This is unlike anything I normally read. But it's like many things that I watch. It's like reading a BBC mini drama set in the 1930s. So you have all these characters you're following, and slowly their lives, their desires, their motivations are weaving together. People have secrets, and people have prejudices, and people have wants and desires. People are looking to be higher in society than they really are, or they're high in society and they want something that society won't accept. There's a lot of talk about Wallace Simpson, and it's very fun and very gossipy and very BBC mini drama. It's very like upstairs, downstairs kind of at the same time, but or Downton Abbey. I never watched Downton Abbey. I can't get into it. I'm going to try again next year. But I've tried multiple times. But it's like that. Like, you have these characters and things about them are being revealed, and they're all working together within the confines of this hotel. And it also feels, because it's about dance and it's about the dancers, and the dancers are there to give the guests a good time and to make them feel important, and to entertain and to be beautiful and perfect. And yet we know some of their backstories and some of their stories, their present stories, and how those don't line up with the facade they have on the dance floor. So it's also feeling very Dirty Dancing to me. So it's Dirty Dancing if it were British, set in a ballroom, set in the 1930s. And that works for me. I'm enjoying it quite a lot. All 4 of the books that I've read so far have been so different from each other, and I'm loving it. They are just, they're so good. It's been such a good reading experience. When I finish One Enchanted Evening, I will be picking up my first nonfiction of the month for Nonfiction November, and that is A Paradise Built in Hell. And then I'll have 2 more nonfictions after that. So I don't know if my reading will get slowed down after this one, but right now I'm like, whoo, I could be winning races right now. And I'm loving every second of it, even listening to an audiobook that didn't quite hit the mark. So far, November reading, so good. Don't lick it. We are going on day 6 of this noise. That's the temperature in here. Based on 2 dehumidifiers. It never stops. Lots of DNFs. Lots and lots of DNFs going on, lots of weird choices going on, and reading lots of books at once going on. So let's check in. I read, after I finished Darling House, I picked up The Christmas Wager by Holly Cassidy. And this was, if you see me looking this way, I have my computer open because some of these were Audible or Libby only, and I don't necessarily remember what they're called, so they weren't in the plans. The Christmas Wager, I had put a bunch of Christmas books on hold at my library, and a couple of them came in, and I listened to this one, and it was actually pretty fun. I enjoyed it from start to finish. It's kind of a enemies to romance sort of storyline, and it was really funny and sweet. I then picked up Hope Harbor. This was on my original TBR. This is by Irene Hannon, and this is a Christian romance contemporary set in Oregon that I was hoping is the first book in a very long series that I was hoping would be a series that I could dip in and out of next year. I have a few series that I'm going to try this month and next month in the hopes of finding a couple that I will enjoy trekking through next year. And I like these. I did enjoy this. I will continue to read these. I like them because they are connected by the place in which they happen, not necessarily by the storyline. So each book can be read as a standalone. And yet, if you read them in order, you'll notice some of the same characters from previous books. And I liked that concept because this year I read so many series that are true series with like cliffhangers at the end of each book and this drive to keep reading. And I got totally burnt out on Outlander, didn't finish it, but loved every book I read, but was starting to feel like all these books are the same. And maybe they were becoming all the same, I don't know. But I want to finish, I have 3 books left not including the one that hasn't been published yet. And so I do want to finish that next year at some point, but I'm still not ready to pick it up again. So I wanted series. I still wanted that cohesive feeling, but I wanted more of a standalone type experience as well. I want the world. I want the whole world. So I was doing some research, and this one seemed like a perfect fit, this Hope Harbor series, for what I wanted. So I tentatively grabbed one of these, the first one, off of Better World Books, and read it this month, and it was great. There are a couple of things that were a little preachy that really don't, like, I really don't like that in a fiction book. And there was a character, a set of characters that were extremely judgmental and outwardly looking focused, like they cared too much about what people might think and less about the welfare of their child, all in the name of the church. And I didn't like that at all, but it's okay. You're not supposed to like those particular, you're not supposed to feel sympathy for those particular characters. But it was a little heavy-handed and a little overboard with the description and with the reactions. And I hope most people don't respond to the situation they found themselves in like these people responded in this book. But other than that, I mean, that's just a small portion of the book. Really, it's the story of this guy who has lost his wife and he's seeking hope. So he ends up going to Hope Harbor and becoming really like quickly enmeshed in this community, and he doesn't really know how it happens. And other people are finding like the pleasant disruption of his existence, his appearance, and his staying power. He's not just a tourist, he's staying there for a while. And the mystery of his story and all of this, they start to open up the mysteries of their own stories. And it was just really enjoyable. It was memorable. I liked it, and I will continue on with Hope Harbor books next year. I read and loved A Paradise Built in Hell by Rebecca Solnit, The Extraordinary Communities That Arise in Disaster. So this was written before COVID, but the preface does directly address COVID. She talks about hang on. I just noticed something I hadn't noticed before. She writes a pretty detailed, like, extended essay on the San Francisco earthquake, Mexico City's earthquake, and I got distracted again. The Halifax explosion, 9/11, and then kind of just life in New Orleans. Like, it was like serial killers and things like that, disappearances, human traffickers, things like that. She writes about some specific disasters. She explains in her preface that she knows that there are many, many terrible disasters that have happened around the world that she could focus on, but because of ease of access in the United States to information about disasters that have happened in the United States and ease of use of language, she chose to stick with the disasters right here in our home country. Hers and my home country, maybe not yours. She writes in a really narrative style, but she also continuously implants these deeper analytical thoughts, and she synthesizes information in a really interesting way, and comes out with a very clear picture of what humans do when something terrible happens. We band together, we do what needs doing, we tend to be fairly positive in the face of such huge tragedies. It doesn't tend to shut down a human. What it shuts down and what it creates chaos and terror in, and where human terror comes from, is the upper crusts of power that start to see their power leave them as people start to solve their own problems and realize they can solve their own problems through community. And so it's an interesting take. It's definitely a political bias, but it's an interesting take. And it's very well researched, and it's very well written, and it's very hopeful about humans in general. That's the real pressing message, is that people do good for the most part. Yes, there are the outliers that do some pretty terrible and atrocious things, some definitely terrible and atrocious things, but they're the outliers and they're the minority, and they get the majority of the attention in society because they are an anomaly. We don't talk as much about the good that's being done in our communities and the way that people support each other every day and through crisis, because that's the norm. So it was really interesting. I highly recommend this book. Highly recommend it. No matter what your political affiliation is. She does talk about how terror mongering is a tool of governments, especially in cases where they feel they're losing control. And in cases where they're losing control, that's generally tied to some kind of catastrophe. So most feelings of terror and most of the impetus for human responses of survival of the fittest, quote unquote, come through the terror that's implanted and pushed upon people through governments. In those instances, not on a day-to-day basis, maybe in some places on a day-to-day basis, but she's talking specifically about within the midst and the chaos of the catastrophe. Most of the time, the people are fine and caring for each other, needing help, that they, needing greater help because their resources will soon deplete. But the fear factor and the turning against each other factor, that actually is a non-entity. It's a non-existing component. If someone's house is burning down, people help. If someone's starving after a earthquake, people feed them. And things like social class and race and political affiliation and personal grievance, those things 9 times out of 10 no longer matter to the people involved in the catastrophe. But they're capitalized, all those things are capitalized on by governmental systems, news outlets, law enforcement, because those are places that stand to lose control that they have fought hard and paid a lot of money to gain. So interesting, very interesting book, very interesting take. Loved it. Actually, really, really loved it. Would love to read it again. I slowly made my way through The Unmaking of June Farrow by Adrienne Young. This one was, my sister loved this. My sister really loved this. She ate it up, and I found it to be so slow. When, if you know, you know, this isn't really a spoiler, but when June Farrow finally goes through the door, what door, you say? I'm not telling you, but when she does, things start to get a little bit more interesting. I did read that portion of the book a whole lot faster than the first portion of the book, but I still walked away going, I think maybe it was just the wrong book at the wrong time. It's slow, it's sultry, it's interesting, it's confusing. I don't know. I think it just wasn't the book for me. I did not really enjoy it all that much. I mentioned that I did a lot of DNFing, and I sure did. I did a lot of DNFing. Oh, I don't know where that book is. I did a lot of DNFing. Sorry, I got distracted. And I'll mention just one of them here. It was a library hold that had come in. I had waited quite a long time for it. Everybody's buzzing about this book, and I DNF'd it because it was so boring, and I don't understand why people were loving it so much. This is Tom Lake by Ann Patchett. This book, I will not destroy it. I know it's very beloved. I couldn't do it. It was so incredibly boring to me. Just couldn't do it. So I let that one go. I think I got about 60%, and I finally just went, no more, waste of my time. I'm done. I hate being in this space. Not gonna do it. If you loved it, you are absolutely entitled to your opinion. I know I'm in the minority. Please allow me to have mine as well. Thank you. I noticed because I have Goodreads open to see what's going on here. I noticed that I don't have this book to hold up, but I did read this book physically. This is Libertarians on the Prairie, Laura Ingalls Wilder, Rose Wilder Lane, and the Making of the Little House books. And I thoroughly enjoyed this book. I think that it is a little bit misleading in its title. This is really a book about Rose Wilder Lane. This is really a biography of Rose Wilder Lane through the lens of her relationship with her mother during the writing of the Little House books. But it's really a biography of Rose Wilder Lane. And I actually think it probably could have got a whole lot more traction if it had been marketed as what it is. It is about her unhappiness, her relationships, her politics, her unraveling, her usurping her mother's life for her own financial gain in the name of trying to support her parents, but her parents really support her for a lot of the time of her life. It's about her desire to be international and politically free. She has some extremely, near the end of her life, she has some extremely bizarre and kind of harmful ideals that make her really, really hard to be around. And she's a difficult person. She's a very difficult person. And I think sometimes without understanding really where she came from or how she got where she was with her ideas and her ideals, people kind of blame Laura and Almanzo for the breach in relationship that they have with her. It does talk a little bit about Laura's stoicism and how Laura felt that her whole family was incredibly stoic because they had to be. They're not the super emotional Little House on the Prairie family that you see on TV. That was made for TV for Americans in a totally different time period. She talks about how there's quotes from her about how she, emotion was dangerous. Like, you absolutely felt sadness and loss and joy, but all of those things were so fleeting, and you had so many other things that you had to be present for survival, that you didn't have the time or the energy or the headspace, or it wasn't safe to actually let those things pass through you. You acknowledged them, but you did not feel them. And that absolutely would have an effect on a child that you're raising, especially a child like Rose, who's very passionate and outspoken and has big ideals and dreams, and is the only child of two parents who do dote on her throughout her childhood. And then the world doesn't dote on her when she grows up, and she finds that people find the way that she's overly expressive of emotion, especially emotions like rage and anxiety, to be off-putting. So she just has a hard time finding balance. It was a really interesting book. It was a really interesting look at her life. I really enjoyed reading it. And it was also very kind of depressing and sad. I read the penultimate book. This was a reread in Ellen Hildebrand's Winter Street series. This is Winter Storms. I am primed and ready for the final book. I've really enjoyed revisiting this series. If you've never read the Winter Street series, I highly recommend it. I've tried other books by that same author, other series, as well as standalones, and I just don't get on with them at all. If you have had the same experience, but you've not read these, I suggest you pick those up. They are very wintry. They are very Christmassy. So I suggest you pick them up around October, November, December, maybe even into January. I listened to This was a total whim. It's been on my radar for a long time, but I realized that it was available at my library right now, so I just picked it up on audio, and it was a short little listen. It's called How to Host a Viking Funeral: The Case for Burning Your Regrets, Chasing Your Crazy Ideas, and Becoming the Person You're Meant to Be by Kyle Scheel. And this is narrated by the author. This is the story of how and why a guy kind of fell into, kind of like a bro kind of guy, fell into building a cardboard Viking ship that carried the regrets and the losses and the hopes and the dreams of, like, I don't even remember how many, like 800,000, some huge number of people around the world carried their regrets and their hopes and their dreams and their losses, and was set on fire. And it was this huge endeavor to not only collect everybody's stuff that would be put on this Viking ship, but to actually build this gigantic life-size Viking ship out of cardboard that would then be set at sail and legally set on fire to send all of these wishes, losses, and regrets, into the ether. And how that changes him, and how that makes him a better person, and how he thinks it helps other people. Through the reading of the book, I didn't do it, but through the reading of the book, you're kind of prompted to write and set fire to, please do so safely, your own little card with your hopes, dreams, regrets, and desires on there. And he also goes into what he understands of the history of and the connection to Viking culture with this. Thinking of ships that set their heroes afire, like a sea burial. And yeah, I mean, it was interesting. It was fun. It was light. It was definitely light. I think he means it to be incredibly heavy and deep, and it just wasn't. The tone was fun and light and hopeful. It was a great little palate cleanser listen for me, and I did really enjoy it. And if that sounds interesting to you, I do recommend it. I finished Truly Madly Deeply by Stephen Galloway. This is the story of Vivian Leigh, Laurence Olivier, and the romance of the century. This is the story of two of my favorite golden age of cinema actors. And I knew the story of Vivian Leigh. I did not know much about Laurence Olivier at all, although he is my favorite Heathcliff. If you've ever seen that version of Wuthering Heights, he's the one. He plays opposite Meryl Oberon, and I learned through this book that he was supposed to play, or they wanted him to play opposite Vivian, but they didn't think that an American actress would be able to pull it off. And then shortly after that, she gets Gone with the Wind. And, well, I mean, I think she could have pulled it off, but that's okay. Meryl Oberon is also great. I find it hard to say that I love this book because it's such a sad story, but I loved this book. This is the kind of book that, it's very informative, but it also brings these historical figures to life. And it's such a heartbreaking story. It's like something out of Shakespeare. It's so sad. These two people who both end up in marriages that are real, but convenient for one reason or another, and not appropriate for them. And then they meet each other and they immediately fall in love, only to discover that one of them is incredibly mentally sick and will never be diagnosed. And this sickness will cause huge rifts and misunderstandings between them and the rest of the world for the rest of their lives, to the point where they finally realize that they're just not good for each other, although they are the only thing that they that's the only thing keeping them going, and they'll choose to separate. And I mean, it's history. I'm not giving you any spoilers here, but it's just so heartbreaking, and it's so beautifully done in this book. I highly recommend, even if you know nothing about them, pick up that story. It is phenomenal. I would love to see a biopic of them. Yeah, it's so great. It's such a great book. I also finished Cleopatra, A Life, and I loved this too. So much I didn't know about Cleopatra, and I realized that I didn't really know where Cleopatra fell in history. I thought she was much later in history than she actually is. So much detail in there about like life in that time period. It's what, like, I think it was like 79 BC. So much earlier than I thought. And the writing is phenomenal. There's so many holes. Like, the reason I wanted to read Stacy Schiff's take on Cleopatra is because I love her work with the Romanovs and I love her work with the Salem witch trials. And I know that with holes, she doesn't try to fill them without letting you know she's filling a hole. And so there's not a lot of information specifically about Cleopatra, but there's a lot of peripheral information. There's not a single bust left of this woman who we know so well, and yet we don't know her at all. It was absolutely fascinating, and I highly, highly recommend learning about Cleopatra, like the actual historical figure, as well as reading that particular biography. Stacy Schiff is a wonderful historian, and just, yeah, highly recommend. Okay, so now what am I currently reading? What am I currently reading? I am currently reading lots of books. I am currently reading, I'm currently giving Mitford a second try. I tried to read this before and really, really struggled getting into it. And I will be honest, I'm 7 chapters in, 80 some odd pages in, and I've fallen asleep 3 times while trying to read this before bed. It is in some ways the perfect book to read before bed because it's so slice of life. It's kind of like a toss-up between Anthony Trollope and which I struggle to like, but really recently really, really loved Orley Farm. So there's that feeling, but there's also a feeling of, I know people say it's supposed to be like Miss Read. I haven't really read Miss Read. I've read like 3 Miss Read books in my entire life. They're not my favorite. So I'm going to steer clear of that. So it's kind of like a mix between Anthony Trollope and Irish Country Doctor. Irish Country Doctor, I love so much. That's one of my favorite series of all time. I'm wanting to do a reread, but I so recently finished the entire, and if you know, there's quite a few books in it, the entire series. And so I want to make sure that I'm not going to revisit it too soon, even though all I want to do lots of times is just re-pick up Irish Country Doctor. And so in fact, maybe I will just do it next year. Maybe that'll be one of the series that I do next year. But I want to say this feels similarly to how that reading experience for me now, with a touch of, wow, this is boring, that Anthony Trollope gives me. Yeah, it's a weird experience, but I am enjoying it, and I did have it. I think that an audiobook would be helpful for me for this one, like to read along, listen along with, especially while I'm reading it before I fall asleep. The wait on the audiobook at the library for this is like 13 weeks or something. I don't know what is up with that. It's an old book. I guess it's still just that popular. But I recently found out Spotify recently opened up like 10,000 audiobooks or something. And you can, if you're a premium member, which I am, you can listen to 15 hours of audiobooks included in your membership. And so I realized that this was on there, and I finally got my hands on an audiobook last night and listened to chapter 6 as I read along. And that was really, really helpful. So I think I am enjoying this. I don't really know some of the time, but I think I am enjoying this. And I think I probably will continue on with this series. I just started last night Madly Deeply by Alan Rickman, The Diaries of Alan Rickman, with the foreword by Emma Thompson. To be honest, I only read the Emma Thompson foreword last night, but I'm going to start this, and I don't know, it's chunky. I don't know if I'm going to be able to finish it before December hits. I don't know if it's the kind of book that I'm gonna want to read very quickly. Diaries tend to take me quite a while to get through. And so I don't know if it's gonna be a quick read or an extended read, but it doesn't bother me at all. I've gone ahead and started this one, and I'll finish it when I finish it. Started, and will probably finish today because it is very tiny. Altered, A Tale of Renovating a Medieval Church in Tuscany by Kylie Tackwell Ball. And the writing in this is really, really poor. But the story is really interesting. I like restoration TV shows and stories. I like fiction that features some sort of home renovation. I love horror that features some sort of home renovation. This is not horror, but there is a ghost. She buys a church to turn into a family home in Italy, and it all goes awry, and that's the entire premise, and that's fine. But it's really her memoir, but it reads a little bit like a letter she might be writing to a friend that's a little bit unedited. I think that it is, it's very poorly written, but it's a great story. And then I am reading The Temple of Fortuna, which is the final book in the Wolfsden trilogy. I will finish this probably this weekend as well, because once I get going, I mean, I've read that in the last couple of days. Once I get going, like with all of life and everything going on, it's a very busy time at work. But once I get going, I'll finish this sentence. Once I get going, I will not be able to stop. So, I'll probably start this evening and stay up all evening and finish it. And I am both terrified and excited. So at this point, our main character, Amara, she is in Rome. She's not in Pompeii, but her daughter and the man she loves are in Pompeii. She doesn't say love. She doesn't think she loves him, but she loves him. And it's the year Pompeii. It's the year that Vesuvius erupts and destroys Pompeii. So I think it's going to be a really sad story. I am working on, I started ages ago, but haven't gotten any further and just haven't picked it back up. I don't know why. I really enjoyed the first chapter, but I've started Over My Dead Body, Unearthing the Hidden History of America's Cemeteries. I think that this will be a very quick read once I just decide to sit down and read it. So excited for that. I'm assuming I will finish all of those except for possibly Madly Deeply in the next week or so. And that will actually give me one more week to pick up some more things off of my original TBR. That being said, I am also listening to My Name is Barbara by Barbra Streisand. It's 48 hours long on audio. 48 hours. 48. 2 straight days of listening if you never stopped and took a break. 48 hours long. For those of you who maybe don't do audiobooks, the average audiobook length, I would say, is about 8 hours. A longer book might be 10, 12 hours. I would consider a really long book to be about 32 hours. Like, I think Anna Karenina and War and Peace are about 30. They're in the 30s, the high 30s. This is 48 hours. I'm listening on 2 times speed because that's comfortable. She does put like snippets of songs that she's talking about, and those play too fast and it sounds like Little Chipmunks singing. But her voice when she's speaking sounds very comfortable at 2 times speed. Lots of times I find that audiobook narrators read entirely too slowly, and so there are some audiobooks that I can put all the way up to 3 and still feel very, very comfortable. Like, it doesn't feel like it's at 3 times the speed. But for Barbara, 2 is the max. And she is so incredibly interesting. I am loving every single second of my time with this book, and I find myself just wanting to not stop listening whenever I start. And because of that, I tend to not want to start because I know that it's going to usurp all of my reading time for a day because I'm not going to want to start. I think I'm at 19 hours now. I've read like 46% or something like that. And I will finish it. It's due back at the library. The library's going to take it back from me unless I go into airplane mode for several days. The library's going to take it back from me in 9 days. So I have 9 days to listen to about 24 hours of Barbara. She's at the point now where she's just finished talking about The Way We Were, which is one of my favorite movies, and she really picks it apart. It is not one of her favorite movies. It could have been, but all the things that they took out of it, she feels like ruined it, and so she made me want to rewatch it. She also made me rewatch Funny Girl. My favorite Barbra Streisand movie of all times is, I'm not a huge fan of her albums. She's got one live album from, I think, like 1994 or 1996 that I really loved. We got it from Columbia House when they used to send CDs. And I used to listen to that all the time. But what I loved about it was the storytelling bits in between the songs. I love a good Yentl song. I love a good, I like her songs, but I tend to not feel like, hey, I need to listen to some Barbara right now. But I love her movies for the most part. I don't enjoy Hello Dolly, and she's talking about Hello Dolly and talking about how it was not a good experience for her, and I think that kind of plays out. I had not seen Funny Girl all the way through. I'd seen bits and pieces of Funny Girl, but I'd never sat down and watched the whole thing, and I did that. My favorite Barbara movie of all times is On a Clear Day You Can See Forever. It's the reincarnation one, where she's Melinda and somebody else. Melinda is the one from the past. And I that's my favorite one by her. It has Jack Nicholson in it for like a split second when he's young. Yeah, super fun. Love it. Love listening to this massive memoir. I truly thought, like, how full of herself is she that she can talk about herself for 48 hours straight. But once I got going, I was like, well, not even once I got going, like from the very initial, 10 minutes, I was like, okay, she can have 48 hours of my life. Okay, I'll do it. I love it. I love it. It's so good and well done. It's about, she keeps saying things like she'll give little life lessons amidst her stories. And she's talking about how successful anything is about what you hold back. It's about the restraint. And you can feel that. She's giving you everything except this bit. And it's great. It's really, really great. So that's where we are. That's where we are with the reading in November. I am going to put up a Christmas tree today, probably while I'm listening to Barbara. And we are just going to chill out. She's been sleeping this whole time. She's having a hard time. Like I said, it's been quite the ride for the last couple of weeks. Next week, they're going to come in and start fixing things up, and hopefully that'll put an end to it and we can be done. And in December, we can just be normal people for a little bit. Well, she's a dog, but she can be a normal dog for a bit. 2 books that I started because I think that normally I read my book of the month. Like, I'll get the November book of the month and read it in December. I've done that all year. I started in December and got Babel, and I read that in January. And then my January book I read in February. My February books I read in March. You see how this goes. But neither of these feel Christmassy enough to wait. And so I've decided to try and read these now, and then my December book, whatever I get, I'll read in December. Because if there's a Christmas one on offer, I'll probably pick that. So we've got The Helsinki Affair by Anna Pitoniak, and we've got Checkmate by Ali Hazelwood. Those are the 2 book of the month books I got, and I started last night by reading a chapter of each and really loved both chapters. They're entirely different from each other. And The Helsinki Affair is very different from things that I normally read. I don't generally get excited about espionage stuff, but for some reason it really, like, the synopsis really drew me in, and I was kind of craving that at that moment. And then when it arrived, I was like, oh yeah, I got this one. And I thought, uh-oh. And then for whatever reason, last night I was like, ooh, I'm really craving the Helsinki Affair. So I pulled it. I thought, let's capitalize on that feeling. So if I do finish both of these this month, that will mean I read 4 Book of the Month months in November. Book of the Month months? No, Book of the Month books in November, because June Farrow and Starling House were both Book of the Month books. Anyway, that is what I'm reading. That is probably all I will read for the month of November. I know I said that I might be able to do more, but that's probably it. So that means that Brandi Carlile, the Mitfords, the new Christelle Davos, the Book of Delights, some books I had on audio from the library, all of those will be recycled to a future TBR pile. I want to read them all. I do. I want to read them all, and I will read them all. Just maybe not right now. I've had a really good reading month for a while there. I do have a lot of 3 stars, and I have a lot of DNFs. Believe me, I DNF'd more than the Ann Patchett. But they aren't all hard DNFs. Most of them are, it's not the right time DNFs. Yeah. I mean, it's just more fuel for the reading fire as time goes by. I'm going to go get some coffee, read for a little bit, and then put up a Christmas tree. And I'm sure that there will be some kind of footage of Christmas tree regalia. That's not the right word, but we're going with it. Hey, I just wanted to take a quick moment in my classroom before everything wild begins and close out this vlog. I read several more books. If you want to know the last few that I read, Here and Only Here by Christelle Davos. I finished Barbara, My Name is Barbara by Barbara Streisand. I think that might be it. You can check out my Instagram account, Chicky Bean Loves Books. It's linked in the link tree below. But this was such a fun vlog to do, and I know that I didn't do the greatest job of checking in all the time, but the month is up. I'm gonna post the video, and just wanted to take a moment to say Goodbye, and I'll see you in December, and let's go read.